the fact that you're getting older in and of itself doesn't mean that you're going to lose muscle. They bring cookies, they bring donuts, and people just gorge themselves with food. It is not a healthy lifestyle. And people talk about evidence-based, but they don't really understand what it means.
Guys, welcome to the show. I am very pumped about this because the guest we have tonight, there's been a lot of anticipation around this guest, and people have asked me a lot of questions about who we're going to be interviewing tonight. It's not one of my pro athletes, but it is a special guest. Before I introduce the guest, my co-host, Jonathan Moore, he's going to be helping me interview our guest, and our guest is Leslie. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a momentous occasion. That build up, right? It's like, it's like I'm expecting to see Terry Crews on here, right?
I know.
Exactly. Or some crazy actor or one of my athletes or whatever. But it's true. I get a lot of questions. Every time I post there's so many comments. People always are asking, like, how long has she been training? What's her diet like? We're going to talk about all of that tonight and much more, because I know the audience, they want to know a lot about your background, when we started training together, because, I'm going to let you kind of cover that, but
Okay.
It's been more than a decade that we've been
Yes,
training together.
that's
So
right.
you kind of start us off on that.
Yeah. So it's back in the day when you used to wear that shirt every day to
Yes.
work.
I wore this shirt. This shirt special. This is the Rec
yeah.
Sports UGA shirt. This is what I used to wear for my personal training.
Assuming that was on purpose?
Yeah, and you can see it says personal training in the back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is
the one that.
Wow.
This is what I. This is what.
That's iconic.
This was
right
our
there,
uniform.
yeah.
That was the uniform.
Yeah, that's what we all had to wear. And so you used to see me in this every day, and I don't think I've worn it since I graduated UGA, and so I think it's been probably.
It's been in your drawer at GSP.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you've seen it on me in about 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's I had to bring it back tonight. It's a throwback night.
Yeah, no, it was a good choice.
Oh yeah.
Because you were a student
right
at Ramsey at UGA, and I had. The reason that I went to see you was because I had been. So I played tennis for a very long time. I started playing tennis when I was 10, and I had played throughout my life. I played in college. I played after college, and so on. And so that was my main activity, sports-wise. I hate running.
So do I.
So I just don't have the mental fortitude. I just find it very boring. But it's great for people who like it.
People are like, she doesn't have the mental fortitude, because you have a lot of discipline. So if you don't like running, then
yeah, I just find it. I like to. We'll talk about it later, but I like the variety that lifting provides. But at any rate, so I had played tennis for a long time, but because of my work situation at the time, I was so busy that I had stopped doing pretty much everything, and was sitting at a desk, and that went on for about 2 years, and I was starting to feel like a lump on a log. And one of my office mates, who was the former provost at the University of Georgia, happened to be training with Joel, and he. And we were talking, and I was saying, man, I feel like, I haven't done anything in a really long time. I need to do something. I'd never done any weightlifting because I was always afraid that, not knowing what I was doing, I was going to hurt myself. And so I didn't really want to go into a weight room and just start lifting. But he told me, I've got this great trainer, and he had back issues then, and so you'd been helping him with that.
He was in his mid-70s, I think. When we were
because he'd retired.
Yeah.
Right, and
Arnett.
he was doing special projects and working with me on that. And so he said, I've got this great trainer. I'm going to let him know. And it just so happened that you had a client who had just graduated, I think. So you had a slot. Even then, he was popular of all the trainers.
I had a wait list.
Oh yeah. So okay, I got you.
Yeah. But he was. I mean, you did have a lot of people, and so we met, and the rest is history.
I still remember Arnett telling me, he's like, "Hey, I have this this lady I think would be a great fit for you as a client. She's super competitive. She's super hardworking and dedicated. I'm like, yeah, that's what they all say. And then little did I know that it would be Leslie, and you've, so it's been 14 years, right, that we've been training together.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to point that out because I think more than anyone well, first off, you've been training with me longer than anyone that I've trained.
Right.
Okay. I mean, we go back, 8 years, 9 years, Ben, about 10 years, 9.5, 10 years, Mitch
is close.
Yeah. Not quite. I think it's more like 13 years.
Yeah.
But, it's not just the time that we've spent training together, but you've been able to kind of witness firsthand, more so than anyone, the evolution of the training methods, and also this journey that I've experienced starting from my PhD and even before I really got deep into the 90-degree stuff. And I want to talk about that tonight too.
Yeah. I got in just at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. She would have got in a year earlier. She would have been doing ass-to-grass squats every workout, and she would be in a wheelchair today.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I've been a guinea pig for 14 years.
Exactly.
And, trial and error.
Exactly. That's right. And if you don't mind me saying, just because people are going to ask.
How old is she?
Yeah, and people's jaws drop every time I mention this. You are 64.
I just turned 64.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that always astonishes people, not just because of how you look, but what you do in the gym is it's incredible. Even just thinking about it today, and I've been training you 14 years, it's kind of mind blowing. I even have a lot of my pro athletes trying to compare themselves to you, not just even relative like body weight, but even absolute numbers sometimes, like some of the crazy things you're able to do. So,
I've always said I'd be a good running back.
Yeah, I know, right? Flea back, right?
Flea back.
That's right. Because you're what, 5'3"?
That's my goal. I'm competing against Joel's pro athletes.
Exactly. And then when we started, you're good with me saying what your body fat was, right?
Yes.
It was 28 point something %. I don't have the file anymore because we kept those at UGA. But and you're now probably you usually probably float around 15, 16% for competition purposes. When you've done your figure shows, you got down to, I believe, 12.5, 13%. So, but I think you usually stay around 15.5, 16. But anyways, you started at 28%. You didn't really have any formal strength training experience prior to that, correct?
None. I had never done anything. I mean, I've always been strong-ish.
Right.
My build has always been slightly muscular, but I had never done any kind of lifting. As I said, I just, it was too intimidating. Like I think it is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, when you go in there, you have no idea how to do anything, and you're looking at videos on the internet and trying to figure out what to do in the gym. So I didn't want to venture on my own, and so it was fortuitous, meant to be, that,
And I assure you, you wouldn't be gaining that much muscle.
You were talking at the beginning.
At the beginning, one of her first things that she said, she's like, "Now I don't want to gain too much muscle,"
which is what most women say.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
And I assure her, "Don't worry about it. You got nothing to worry about." She's like, "You sure?" I'm like, "I'm positive." And then of course we saw Anna. I'm not going to say her last name, but
So so I went in like so many women, because when you don't know anything about anything when it comes to lifting, you go in and you go, "I want to be more toned," right? That's what everybody says, not really understanding what that means, right? And so again, I hadn't been doing any exercise for 2 years, and I was at 28% body fat, so I didn't look particularly athletic. And I went in essentially saying that I needed to start moving again. But I didn't want to get too bulky. I didn't, because when you think about, and I think for a lot of women, maybe not so much now, but 13 years ago, there weren't that many women in Ramsey that were lifting. I think if you go in today, there are probably way more. But back then, gosh, it sounds like I'm talking about decades, but I mean, it's only been 1.5, I guess. But you don't really, when you think about weightlifting in women, you think about what you see in physique competitions or bodybuilding, and so women who are super muscular and really bulky and, you know, that kind of thing. And I did not want to go there. And then there was another, she wasn't a trainer, was she?
No,
she was a
a
cheerleader.
cheerleader.
Yeah.
And I think she might have competed in figure.
Yeah. Striking girl. And she had some serious muscle. And she was super strong. And, you know,
well, back then you thought she was super strong, and she was.
Yeah, she was strong.
But
and I remember thinking, you know, I wanted to be as strong as she was, and probably still is. But I didn't want to look like that, you know. I didn't want to have all that muscle. And Joel was like, don't worry, you know, you're not going to get that bulky.
Exactly.
And,
meanwhile, 5 years later, you're doing figure shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you come in a session with Joel, it's like just super light
Yeah,
activation, nothing intense.
Exactly.
No problem.
No
Probably
problem.
10-pound dumbbell, but you'd be exhausted.
I used to
it.
get Taylor Heineke with this every time. He'd come and be like, "Oh man, I'm feeling tired today. I think I need to take the day off." And I'd be like, "Okay, no worries. Hey, let me have you just do a single leg stand before you go. Just activate your feet, then you can be on your way." You know, 45 minutes later, he's sweating buckets, and he's like, "Man, you're not doing this to me again."
Yeah.
So
no. But I guess, you know, I mean, and again, I think a lot of women have this question, you know, are you going to start weightlifting, and are you immediately going to get huge like the women who compete in physique and that kind of thing? And the reality is, no, you don't. I mean, yes, I get a lot of comments about my arms, especially in the summer when I'm, you know, wearing sleeveless stuff. And women, I get a lot of compliments from women, and a lot of women who say, "Oh, I want your arms." So there is this notion that you can potentially get huge and bulky and, you know, what they consider unattractive. But the reality is that unless you're taking something, you know, unless you're doing steroids or that kind of stuff, you're not going to get, you know, that look.
Exactly.
So,
well, and especially if you keep your body fat relatively
really
low, it prevents this ultra puffy kind of bloated look that most women don't want.
Right.
Most men don't even want. And so I think a lot of women, once they lose the level of body fat they hope to, and then compare that, like, you know, with the level of muscle that they gain, rarely would they ever say they look too bulky or they're not happy with it, because it's a pretty nice natural look. And I think that's what we found for you, like you said, to really get to that point where it's unattractive and just not pleasing the eye. It's going to have to be some type of ergogenic aid or some type of hormone therapy or steroids or testosterone or something.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we'll keep getting more into you know, the early days, because, you know, I love reminiscing about this. I know you do too, but I think the audience kind of wants to know when we first started training, and I still find this interesting. Again, I wish I would have taken more videos. This was right before the social media era began. I wasn't even on any of the social media platforms, but we did get a few videos, and but we did, again, you kind of came in as I was looking at the research on 90 degrees. I hadn't quite finalized what I was going to do for my dissertation, but I started you in with some of the 90 degree stuff. In fact, a lot of our training was roughly 90 degrees, but I still incorporated some of the full range of motion exercises, like deep squats. We did some deep lunges on boxes, basically a deficit lunge.
Deficit lunges.
We did push-ups on a deficit where you went deeper than the handles.
Cambered bar.
The cambered bar, that's right. We did the cambered bar bench press. You know, that's the bar where it basically goes deeper than what a standard bench is, because it actually goes like 6 inches below. I don't think I had you go to the point where you were touching your chest with the cambered bar, but we were going significantly below the natural or the nothing, but the typical stopping point. So you were privy to kind of the combination of me blending the methods at first, because that's what I didn't really know better. I was still trying to figure out. I was starting to realize and tune into something with this 90 degree thing, or at least slightly more abbreviated ranges of motion.
Right.
But I hadn't finalized it yet. So,
Ben and I.
Ben and you
because
and Ben,
we talked about some of the squats and how, you know, we are like you said, our toes were slightly because I remember you saying, you know, your toes should be about like 5 degrees.
5 or 10 degrees.
5
I think
or 10
was
degrees. You know, out, and then your knees. You know, same thing as you're going down. You
push them out.
Push out your knees and stuff. So if you look at some of those early
Can't believe
squats,
that.
Yeah, you can't. I know.
Existed,
Well,
right?
okay, but you have to, the context here was probably, even a few months before that. My go-to was turn the feet out 20 to 30 degrees, push the knees out as hard as you can to spread the floor, go as deep as you can. So that was a huge, 5 degrees or 10 degrees out was a huge departure already in my mind, and it was going against the grain. And even people then were looking at me like, wait, why her feet not going out more? And it's like, in my mind is like, wow, this is totally different than anything I've done. But I think based on the research, it's at least better. But and it's funny because even to this day, that is a slightly old habit that does want to creep in occasionally if you don't really focus on your feet. It's just a bad habit. It's just like anything. If you do it for enough time, and then as I got more into the science, we got deeper into the methods. It's like maybe it's not 5 or 10. Maybe it's like 0 or like a few degrees is okay. And then we just kept refining it more and more. And interesting though, because your knees were the one area that were a little sensitive at first, and they did occasionally act up. And I think if you could kind of go back in time, that was one of the
one of the reasons.
For sure. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to think about that we used to do that. And again, we got a few videos of you doing that. I've got a handful of me doing it, but other than that, if I would have known, I would have videoed everything.
The journey.
And I still remember having you do lunges on like those deep boxes. Like if you said your hips were tight, I think we did it actually in between 2 overhead press stations, like 2 military press stations, because the spotter stations attached to those, they were next to each other. So I was like, hey, this is a perfect spot to do a deficit lunge. And I always remember you saying, it's like, oh, this feels so good. This feels so good. I'm getting that deep stretch in the hips. This is, going to help release everything. And you would get that momentary release for
momentary.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it would come right back. And sure enough, we'd have to do the same thing next time. And if you want to get that same stimulus or that same sensation of that stretch, well, what do you have to do? You have to go even deeper. So it's just, it's cool. But I'm glad you got to experience that, because you're the only person who I train now.
Right, the before and after.
Obviously, my clients at Indiana University experienced that to an extent in terms of the deep range of motion, but they're no longer with me because they're there. But so it's cool that we kind of have that in the in the bank in terms of what we can look back at. So we kept training. You gained good muscle as we continued to refine the methods more. You continue to gain more strength and more muscle, and the little nagging aches and pains. Even in your calves, because I remember the calves and I think the toes out and all that. I think that contributed to it. But those continue to dissipate more and more as we lock the methods in. So much so that you gained a great amount of muscle mass. Your physique got pretty incredible, and you ended up doing some competitions. Talk about the competitions that you've done.
So interestingly, it was Anna who brought it up first.
Was it?
Yeah, because I, we were talking earlier about
take credit for it.
Well, so I remember the conversation. I remember clearly, as we were talking earlier, I lost a lot of body fat very quickly. Because one of the things, in addition to the lifting, because at that point we were lifting 2 days a week, I think. I think oftentimes that's how you would start your clients, on 2 days a week. And so the other 3 days I would do a lot of HIIT routines, because you'd given me various high intensity workouts to do. And I was running, but I was running on the track, because I do like sprinting. I just don't like long distance running. And so I did a lot of sprinting up on the track. So I do that in the mornings. And then after workouts, I would often do another 20, 30 minutes of some pretty good cardio at Ramsey.
I had some little kind of interval type things I would have you do.
Yeah. And so I remember I lost a lot of body fat really quickly, faster than I obviously put on muscle. And so I was super lean. And I remember Anna was the one who said, have you ever done any competitions? You should do masters competitions. I had no idea what she was talking about. I wasn't, I was not in that world. So I didn't know what she meant when she said figure competitions and that kind of thing. And so I remember that there was Ramsey brought some guy in, I can't remember now, a guy who from Beaufort, I think, who, do you remember that?
Yeah.
To Ramsey, and he did like a little workshop thing on figure competitions and that kind of
Posing.
stuff. In posing, yeah, right. And then I was like, well, might as well try it.
That's right, because technically you did your first show there.
It was at Ramsey.
That's right. I just remember that.
Yeah, they had this
That's
little
crazy.
thing at Ramsey.
That was like your first it was like an unofficial show, but it was a...
And I was the only one.
Yeah.
Because nobody was doing figure, you know.
Well, you're the only figure, it was it was mainly bodybuilders, male bodybuilders.
Yeah,
You were the only female,
right. And so other than that, I think before that, we had done the strongest dog competition.
Oh, the powerlifting one.
The powerlifting one, and it was myself and one other girl who was a freshman at UGA, who was twice my size.
Yeah, she was big.
And I only weighed 111 at that point.
Small.
I was small, and she was twice my size, and super nice girl, and she came in, and the way the scoring was done, like per pound, I ended up winning like both times that I did it, even because I think my chest press was stronger than hers. I can't remember, but I had done the two strongest dog competitions, and so then we started talking about figure. And so I started exploring it, and I hooked up with this woman in Athens who had done some competitions, and I also knew someone else who had done competitions, and so she actually was Candace. I don't know if you remember her.
Yeah, I do remember.
She helped me, with the posing. I had no idea what I was doing.
No.
And so the first show was, I think, over in Stone Mountain or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, it was a small show, and it was quite the eye opener because NPC. So
because that's what you ended up. Yeah.
That was the first thing that I did was that NPC show, and so it was a little intimidating, and it was a little for me, that part of competition has always been the hardest, the being on stage. And
just for people who aren't familiar with NPC shows, everyone, especially the bodybuilders, male bodybuilders and female, I think they actually took female bodybuilding now, but they have physique now.
Yeah.
But fitness and figure competitors, and even bikini competitors, and the bikini competitors, they have very little muscle on their body.
Yeah.
But even almost all of them, take low levels of testosterone or steroids. They just do. You were probably the only natural competitor in there that was entirely natural, and you can set the record straight on that, because I know a lot of people, I post you, and they see your muscularity and mention your age. They're like, there's no way she's natural, she uses stuff.
Never.
Yeah.
I do not believe in putting extraneous substances in my body, be it anything like steroids, hormone replacement.
You're even against the whole hormone replacement thing.
I don't like the notion of hormone replacement. I think it's just for some people it's maybe necessary, but for your average person, I don't believe it is.
I think it's a lot less necessary than most people think. I think they think it's inevitable once you hit a certain age that you got to take. It's like, no, not if you
it's
take
a very
good care
complicated thing, and I think that endocrinologists should be the ones that determine whether you need hormone replacement, and even then, we'll be talking about research later.
For sure.
But I was actually listening to one of the podcasts that I listen to quite regularly. It's called Sensible Medicine, and it's all about evidence-based medicine. And the person, one of the hosts, was talking about the studies that back in the day, how much estrogen replacement therapy was kind of just the standard practice. And then, things have changed since then based on some of the research and stuff. So I've never taken any steroids.
I can barely get you to take. You don't take supplements
any
anymore.
supplements anymore.
I used to try to get you to take, pre-workout and Creatine, you did a little bit, but you mentioned that it messed with your stomach a little bit.
Creatine is really hard on my stomach, and so I've done it at times, but I just don't. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I feel like I hold a lot of water, and so I don't. I'm not a huge water drinker either, which is not good, but it's just not something I do. And so, I don't like it. And it's one of the reasons that eventually after, I trying to think how many competitions I did. I did a lot.
Yeah. You did
over the years.
5?
At least.
Yeah. Well, figure shows, NPC figure shows.
I did, because I did regional ones. I did the local one. I did regional ones at least twice. I did the SNBF.
I did
that once as well. And then I've done at least 3 nationals.
Yeah, the national ones. Well, the national ones, just if people are interested, you did not win, but you came in second. Pretty much every time. And I don't ever know if I showed you the pictures, but it was very clear you had a better physique than
my posing is just terrible.
Your posing needs work. It's not your specialty. But also, bodybuilding and figure training is so subjective.
Yeah.
It's just it's all up to the judges. Well, every time the number, I don't care what bodybuilding competition you look at, whoever wins, they know the judges to some extent and are pretty chummy with them. They're pretty friendly. You didn't know any of the judges because I had no inroads in that world. It's a totally different world. Yeah. So it was.
I always went by myself.
Yeah.
Occasionally
I went to the local ones. I didn't go with the national ones for you. So you were literally, I was rare. It's rare for someone to go to a bodybuilding show or figure show on their own without having kind of a.
And for most women, they're part of teams, or they've got trainers that they have somebody who helps them with the sort of the workout part, and then there's somebody that does all of their nutrition and helps them with like the peak week and prep and all that kind of stuff. And I never did that. So it was just you and me.
Yeah, you and me, and then you had a posing coach that helped you a little bit because I wasn't.
A little bit,
not a lot.
Not a lot. And and then a person that I knew in Athens who had made it into IFBB Pro, but she was also natural, and so eventually, you just feel like you're at a disadvantage.
Right. Before I forget, because I just remembered this, one of the every judge seemed to give you strong accolades about your backside, your glutes and hamstrings, which is ironic because we never did deep squats or full range of motion except a few very early on in the training. Like the judges were always saying, wow, your hamstrings, the striations in your glutes. You look at a lot of the masters figure competitors, especially 40 and over, they have pretty flat glutes usually, and you had a fairly flat rear end when we started. And that is, but you developed it nicely. And again, we didn't develop that from doing any deep squats or full range of motion. And you had better glutes and hamstrings than any of the other competitors who many of them were doing full range of motion. So this ideology about, you need deep squats to develop the backside and get that, nice booty, complete garbage, total myth. There's no
necessary. But eventually I just felt like after doing several of them and collecting a fair amount of hardware. So I ended up I used to do my age division in a lower one, and I got up to second place. And
at nationals.
And I think at the end of the day, so I stopped, I guess, when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And then it was a matter of whether I wanted to start up again after the pandemic. And I think I just eventually started to feel like even if I were to win at nationals and then go into IFBB Pro, I wouldn't really, unless you are taking steroids, you don't really stand a chance. And so, and what was I aiming for? What was the goal? For me, the goal was never about the competition. The goal for me for working out was always, to feel well, to feel good, to feel strong, to feel fit. And it wasn't, like I said, I didn't even know about these competitions when I first started. So it was never really about trying to win anything. And, what they did, the number of years that we did competitions, it was a goal. It gave me something to work towards. But it was never sort of the thing. I was never chasing that in and of itself. And at the end of the day, I find that it's not a healthy lifestyle, because when you're off season, people gain a lot of weight, and you put on, you eat a lot, you put on all this weight, and as to try to build muscle and so on, and then you have to cut, and you go, you swing all the way to the other extreme, and I think those kinds of weight extremes and swinging from one to the other are not healthy. I think it's very stressful on the body. It's certainly mentally very stressful. You're hungry all the time. And then the other side is that when you're gaining weight to try to put on muscle, for me, I don't like carrying all that extra weight for months and months and months. I don't feel comfortable. It's just sort of
like that one competition.
Just for a competition, and so I feel like, I'd like to be at a good body weight where I'm, somewhat lean, and but I feel strong, and I feel like I have energy, and I feel fit, and ultimately that's what I'm striving for. It's not, and I started at 50, if you do the math. So again, it was never really about, it was never about the competition. And I remember actually reading I was thinking about this the other day, a T-Nation article that interviewed a whole bunch of male trainers. And they were asked, if you had a daughter who wanted to compete in figure, would you let her? And pretty much, 201, the answer was no. In part because of the whole atmosphere.
It's kind of a sleazy atmosphere.
It's not a very,
No, it is.
I know.
And
I don't know too much.
Well,
about
it's sleazy atmosphere. I can tell you right now, everyone's sleeping with everyone. They are. It's just.
I always went to a hotel that was, a little bit distant. I was outside kind of the thing. I mean, people were into it, really seemed to enjoy it. It was not, something, again, you feel good for a period of time, because you're lean, but you're also not full of energy. Because you're not eating very much.
Sure.
It's like the UFC fighters.
Oh yeah.
They cut constantly, and the toll it takes on them. So.
Yeah, and you're a caloric deficit, and so it's tough, and so I just But for a while, you look at yourself, and then, of course, after you got spray tanned and all that stuff, and now your muscles really stand out,
popping.
So you kind of feel good for a little bit, but you can't sustain that. And then coming off of competition is really tough. And I learned that the first time I did that local one, because I remember after that we went to like Applebee's or something.
Yeah,
and
I remember.
We just downed all these cheese fries.
You
you were there.
I'm just kidding. I ate a lot too.
All this, like, you're not supposed to eat a lot of salt, and I mean, again, you have to kind of.
Yeah, I never eat salt.
I do. I love salt, but so you have to, kind of slowly get back into normal eating habits. You can't just go from not eating anything to eating. And what's interesting is that when you're, backstage, the minute the competition is over, you should see how these women eat. I mean, they bring cakes, they bring cookies, they bring donuts, and people just gorge themselves with food. It is not a healthy lifestyle.
It's not.
Again, there are people who really love it, who really enjoy it, and all, more power to them, but it was not something that I wanted to do. And
they're also taking additional drugs to help them get that lean.
Yeah.
So it's, again, you didn't do any of that diuretics.
It's just a lot of
horrible on the body. Again, like you said, you didn't get into training
for that purpose.
You got in for health and for overall fitness. This was and you basically said, okay, I'm going to do these competitions, but with the caveat of I'm going to stay healthy. I'm not going to do damage to my body like a lot of these people do.
That also makes it kind of more impressive, because most of those people weren't coming in to their competitions and stuff with that mindset. They're coming in for the show.
Right.
You just came into the show.
It was a bonus.
It was like it was a bonus.
So that's just
to
even
my
more
training.
of a testament to you, and then also the methods too. So.
I mean, I think I've always said this, that proper training will produce more muscle growth and strength than if you're actually doing traditional bodybuilding methods. So because first off, if your body's healthy, you're going to inevitably be able to put on a good amount of muscle because that protein synthesis pathway is going to happen more readily. Your hormones are going to be better. Your endocrine function is going to be better. And because you're healthy, you're going to be able to lift more weight without being in pain. So what happens? You gain a lot of muscle. And then if you want to do a show, you can. If you want to do a powerlifting show, you can. Which I want to go back real quick here, just the powerlifting thing, because at that stage when you started, when you did 2 powerlifting shows at UGA, at that stage we had pretty much completely abandoned the deep squats and all that, and we were pretty much into the 90, I say 90-degree concept, but 90-ish because it was like around parallel, you know, maybe a little above, whatever. So we hadn't refined it as much. But the point is, we were training like that. And then a few weeks before competition, before your powerlifting competition, then we would actually start to do a few competition-style lifts, reaching full depth, which was very easy for you to, you know, practice and for you to do. It wasn't like, oh, I haven't done this ever. My body's not capable of going any deeper than the 90-degree position we've done. It was no issue for you. And just a few practice attempts for a few weeks beforehand was all you needed to basically take that transfer or transfer your strength and be able to compete in a powerlifting show and reach the depth that they required, both on the squat and the bench press, because the deadlift, obviously, you know, we were practicing that, but
and I don't really have any mobility issues. I mean, for as long as we've been doing 90 degrees, I know that there's this notion that if you're not doing all these mobility drills, that you won't have the flexibility, and you know, so, you know, can I bend my body in half? You know, maybe, you know, like knees over toes guy who's, you know, I can't do that, but I'm plenty flexible. I can get down to ass to grass without any problem.
I would argue you wouldn't want to be any more flexible than you are. You have perfect level of flexibility because your joints and your tissues and your muscles are healthy. So when you do need those deeper positions, they're there. But I can tell you, like, the times when your knees have bothered you in the past because you did something a little off, those were the times where your mobility was compromised. And those usually stem back from, you were going a little too deep, or your feet were rotated out, which allowed you to collapse a little bit. So in reality, your mobility was optimized once the range of motion was closer to 90 degrees.
And I don't think of myself as having any kind of mobility issues, not being able to, you know, again,
we've done posts with you squatting deep with decent weight, and like, look, she can do it. We never train it. She's capable, because, you know, there's like you said, this notion that if you don't train deep, like, your body will spontaneously explode once you go past 90 degrees. It's not based on any science. It's actually, they're trying to use philosophy to make a scientific argument rather than science to make a scientific argument. You know, there's no grounding in reality there. Before we continue on more with the training methods, because people want to hear more about that and how things have changed over the years and the type of training that we do, I want to kind of go on a different topic here with the research, because we've had a lot of discussions over the years, especially because, you know, you knew me when I was doing my PhD, when I was working on my dissertation. So I was combing the literature at the time. Still do, not as much as you do, because you're in the UGA medical school. By the way, you have a PhD, if people wanted to know. She has a PhD as well. Jonathan, you're the only one without a PhD here.
It's going to be that way.
Exactly. You have a PhD in
pharmacology.
So you understand science pretty well. And you're also very savvy on being able to examine research studies in general, especially scientific ones, and kind of dissect it. And so you've done that a lot. We've had a lot of discussions. I want you to kind of point out, because you can do a much better job than I can on this, but explain to the audience some of the flaws that we see in research studies that often don't get mentioned.
So one of the opportunities that I've had working at the medical school is that one of my coworkers is actually a world expert in evidence-based medicine, and so and I've now worked there for 17 years, and so I've had the benefit of his expertise and actually learning a lot from him over the years about evidence-based medicine, which, you know, the term evidence-based gets thrown around a lot in the fitness industry, and people talk about evidence-based, but they don't really understand what it means. And I would even say that a lot of our, if you're a basic scientist like I am, and that's how I was trained, I can look at the science that's related to whatever topic I was working on, which was, you know, molecular biology, and read an article, and I'm familiar with the methods, and so I can look at a paper and say, yeah, it's good, it's not, you know. But when you get into human subjects research, it's a whole different ballgame, and understanding what evidence means in that sense is very different. And I think it's difficult for people, even our basic science faculty, if you're not trained in, you know, how to look at human subject studies, the types of, like, you know, clinical studies, you know, sort of the number of, like, confounding variables, and, you know, and things that can affect results, the number of the sample size, the number of people that you would have to look at in order to get a result that's actually valid. You know, is the design of the study appropriate? There's a whole lot of different ways to do human subjects research, from observational studies, which tend to be kind of, you know, seen as kind of the bottom rung in terms of evidence, but that's not always the case.
Before you go any further, I want to just jump in real fast, because I want the audience to understand why we're bringing this up. Okay, it's not just to discuss research for the sake of it, because you're knowledgeable on that. It's because there's oftentimes, pretty much every time I do a post, people say, oh, this is not evidence-based, or the research doesn't show this, or the research shows this instead. And you have to look at all of the research, you have to look at all the science, and you can't just take certain studies, oh, here's the conclusion the authors came up with, and they did, you know, human subject studies, and they had 12 people in this group and 11 people in this, and here's what they found. What we're trying to point out to you guys listening is that there's a lot of flaws in a lot of the research, so much so that you have to be careful what you interpret from it. And this is why we're discussing this. So keep going.
So I think for your average person who doesn't spend their time looking at, you know, scouring the literature or looking through PubMed or reading those types of studies, you know, it's very hard to interpret the results of a study. And so, and then, you know, and so when people say, you know, oh, where is, you know, you're not citing any studies. Well, if you look at the literature, most studies are done with very small numbers of people, and then your controls, if you will. So when you're comparing populations, usually when you're doing a study and you're doing an intervention, like, I don't know, some kind of exercise, and you want to see the effect it might have on a population, you have studies, you know, every study is done with a slightly different population and slightly different, you know, different age groups, different number of peoples, different settings. The interventions are not standardized, and so on. And so when you've looked at one study, you've looked at one study.
Right.
And so, you know, to make generalizations based on a single study is not appropriate. And so, you know, the way that you would look at this would be potentially looking at systematic reviews. So systematic reviews are, you know, is a more rigorous process by which you essentially look at a series of studies. So you identify studies that fit particular criteria, and you exclude studies that don't fit that criteria, that weren't done properly, and so on and so forth. But even that is very difficult to do when it comes to a lot of the sort of exercise science.
Well, they often have to adjust those parameters just to get
enough
a significant amount of studies. So it's not like, oh, we found one study. Let's say, okay, well, this isn't going to be a good review. They have to sometimes broaden the...
So the searches are generally very broad because you want to start by capturing as many as you can, and then you start to whittle them down based on the exclusion criteria. And one of the things that's interesting is that oftentimes in systematic reviews, you start with, you initially identify 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 articles, and by the time you're done and you get down to the ones that you're actually going to compare, you're down to a dozen or a handful. So that already tells you that there's a lot of research out there that's not well done. And so, and then if you don't have the expertise to look at how these studies are done, it's very hard to judge. Was this study done properly? Was this intervention, they're not randomized, they're not blinded, which is sort of the gold standard, because you can't blind it. And, if somebody's asking you to do a particular exercise, you know what they're asking you to do. And so you can't do, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, which is sort of the gold standard, at least in clinical medicine, when you're doing this kind of stuff. And so it's very hard to judge the quality of a study because, number one, you don't have the expertise to know, well, is this the appropriate study design? So oftentimes the study designs are not appropriate. So what you end up finding oftentimes is that by the time you've reviewed these articles, you've compared them, you've looked at all of the way the design was done, and so on and so forth, you end up with the inability to really come to a conclusion. So most systematic reviews of, what was I looking at recently? I was looking at studies of whole body cryotherapy, right? So that's a very popular thing these days. But you look at studies and they're all done different amounts of time, different temperatures, at different times after a particular exercise.
Well, that's where the reproducibility issue is.
Right. And so, so you don't, you don't reproduce them. A lot of research is not reproduced. And so, when people say, oh, this study showed, well, maybe that study showed, but maybe if you did that study 20 times over, what you end up is with a result that's really not significant. And so a lot of these systematic reviews will say that there is just the, very low level evidence in support of whatever, they were looking for.
That picture, it's got like the iceberg, it's just like this, it's like surface level. And not going down deep
exactly.
Into
Not
like
going deep.
The true substance of what it is.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, you can have like a couple hundred, couple thousand articles. It's like which ones really have substance.
Yeah,
if you
which
put all
ones
those
are good.
variables together,
which ones
maybe like a dozen.
Yeah.
Then from those dozen, dissect the research, find out your conclusions from there. Whereas a lot of people, like you're saying, they'll look at those several hundred that really don't have much substance.
And when that's not your life, when that's not what you do, if you're not a researcher, you can see a study. First of all, I often wonder how many of these people that are commenting on your post have actually ever seen the actual research, have ever actually looked at the article, and how many of them are saying, everybody quotes this particular study because it's a really well-known study, or because somebody they know, some, influencer has mentioned this study. And so now everybody jumps on the bandwagon and says, oh, what about this study? And my response to that often is like, have you looked at it? Are you able to judge this study? And do you know that it's a good study? Because for your average person, even assuming that they're looking at the article itself, what that means is they've read the abstract and read the conclusion. Yeah. And but you don't have the, for no fault of your own, but you don't have the expertise to read through the methods and say this was properly done. And so
a lot of times you scroll the conclusion.
You scroll to the conclusion and you let the authors tell you what it is they want you to get out of the study. And so that's where systematic reviews come in handy, because these are people that have not done the studies. And they're looking at all of these sort of as external reviewers and saying, at the end of the day, when you look at more than just the one study, there really is no strong evidence, for example, that whole body cryotherapy is, maybe it helps you a little bit, but it's, maybe it doesn't, and they don't look at side effects and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that's a great point. I think when you're saying like the low level of evidence thing, and that is completely applicable to the range of motion topic, or this question of like, well, what is the optimal range of motion? And I'm the first to say there aren't enough studies to prove it one way or another. But if you start to go through all the fundamental and foundational sciences and disciplines of kinesiology, not just the human subject studies, oh, this group did this type of training, then this group did this. It's like, no, let's look at the foundations of neuromuscular physiology, structural muscle physiology, like we always talk about, biomechanics, and then see what that tells us, and then see if there are actual human studies, human subject studies that support that, and then also see, okay, is there also experiential and some anecdotal evidence from practitioners in the field that also supports that. And to me, that's how you come up with the best conclusion in terms of
putting the puzzle
together. It's the puzzle.
So now when you see the puzzle, you can see the whole picture.
Because you can't just really look at like a study like, hey, here's the answer. You can't do that for any area of research. Nothing, whether it's nutrition, whether it's biology, whether it's it's another one. It's another doozy of a topic. But and I think a lot of people do this. Yeah. And that's why I'm not quick to just point out one study. Oh, here's the study that proves it. It's like, no, you're
not going to be able to find that.
You'll never be able to.
I mean, you're not going to find that for your stuff. You're not going to find that for the other side either, or or the people who argue about other methods. I mean, clearly other people do other things, and they gain muscle and they gain strength and so on and so forth. But how are we ever going to know that sort of without, you're not standardizing the comparisons. And so, and how do you know that, is this person going to be able to continue this method of training for the next 20, 30, 40 years without getting hurt? I mean, it's like the whole longevity thing. Right.
Well, that's actually kind of the next topic I wanted to go into. But before we do talk about the longevity and all the injuries and stuff, just one other thing that I've always found interesting with the research is like you mentioned the quality. A lot of the quality components of these strength training studies, they're pretty poor. And you've seen it just not with strength training studies because you're not in the kinesiology area, but just with research in general, the competency of the practitioners or the people performing the study, the scientists and researchers, but also you're dependent on the competency of the subjects and participants to be able to take what they were instructed and do it the right way. And in strength training studies, it's pretty lousy usually because the researchers don't know how to coach the exercises right, and the participants aren't very astute at being able to take what little information and coaching cues are given to them. So then you walk away from a study, it shows like, okay, well, this a squat study that was done with poor technique and poor instructions, like, okay, here's the results. Like, all right, how much can we take from that? Obviously, you don't completely disregard it, but you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt somewhat because the quality is going to be pretty poor.
And even the interventions, I think, in the way that people describe them, I know that when I've looked at some of the studies, that the way, what somebody interprets as 90 or a quarter squat, a half squat, a full squat, that varies sometimes by whoever's doing it. So some person might say this is a quarter squat, but it's 90 degrees, or so how they're measuring that varies by whomever is doing the study. And so again, you have very little standardization, and when you're asking somebody to do an exercise, again, there's all sorts of biases that can creep in, and there's and everything. There's just too much variability, and so the evidence is never super strong in favor of one thing or another. And I think that's a problem. And then a lot of times the other comment that you get a lot is, where are the peer-reviewed studies? So like peer review is some sort of panacea. Well, peer review, if you think about it, when somebody, people who say that in my mind have never been involved in any kind of peer review process. And so when you're reviewing an article, when somebody sends you an article to review, number one, they're sending you what they've wrote, their perspective, their results. You have no idea what they've done potentially to manipulate those results, which is a reason that you end up with so many, retractions from really good journals, because at the end of the day, somebody realizes that, or somebody either, there's a whistleblower, or somebody looks at something and says, this doesn't really look right. So, and when you're a peer reviewer, oftentimes you've got, in addition to whatever work you're doing, a number of, so, that could be a whole other podcast in itself. But peer review does not guarantee that what is published is real or true. Sure, and so when people say, where is the peer reviewed, evidence, it's like, just because it's peer reviewed, especially these days. These days,
who's peer review?
And these days, there's lots of predatory journals. They will pay you to publish and stuff. So there's a lot of open source stuff. There's a lot of non-peer reviewed. There's just a lot of information out there that doesn't really have good evidence supporting it. But it's what people have been doing for years and years and years. And, we've talked about the fact that some of the, in the days of, Arnold, when people were doing the kinds of exercises they were doing, where was the science? Were they basing what they were doing on published research? I don't think so.
Exactly.
And yet here we are saying that what they did, we should still be doing what they did because it was right. It's like, in some ways, the science, we've been doing science to prove that those methods were right, which you could argue is confirmation bias. But again, why are people so obsessed with the peer-reviewed and where's the evidence-based when oftentimes what they're looking at are protocols that people invented before there was any science to support it. And suddenly, like, that's the be-all end-all. And you should be doing that. Why? So it might take a long, long time for people to, come around to, there are a lot of people that have come around to thinking that what you do and your methods have helped them.
But it's not because they found that one study that gave them the confirmation and every bit of whatever they needed in their minds. Like, oh, this is what I needed. Now I'm convinced. It's like, no. They found it useful, or they agreed with it eventually because they tried it. That's why. And that's why we always try and tell people, hey, try it.
Don't knock it before you try it.
Don't bash it before you try it. Exactly. And before we move on to this topic, I thought it was interesting what you said about the quality of the interventions, because a common thing we'll see with like the range of motion studies is that they'll have two groups. One group that's like 45 degrees range of motion, and the other group is 120 degrees in the squat. Well, then they examine which group had more muscle growth. Well, I could tell you right off the bat, the 120 degrees is going to have more growth, more strength gains than 45 degrees. So immediately what ends up happening is the researchers say, oh, more stretch, more stretch produces more growth. People run wild with that, and they think, okay, more is better, maximal stretch is best. It's like, no, nowhere in the literature does it ever suggest that.
It just happened to be better than 45.
Exactly.
So as a result,
so that's what, like you said, the interventions are usually pretty poor.
And unless you have, the knowledge to really dissect these studies, you're not going to be able to judge the quality of the research. And so I think there's just a lot of stuff out there, and in terms of muscle physiology, there's also a lot of stuff that's done in mice, and there is this saying, mice lie, monkeys exaggerate, in science, so mouse models don't necessarily translate to humans. In fact, a lot of times they don't. And so, so again, it's sort of, when I start to hear influencers go on about, particular studies that have been done in mice, and therefore, I'm going to do this, that, or the other based on that study. It just, again, there's simply no evidence to support that a particular practice is going to make any difference. And the placebo effect is very real.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are studies of knee osteoarthritis where, you know, you inject steroids versus you inject saline into somebody's knee joint.
Which is just water.
Yeah. And, you know, and the people who get saline, you know, 30% of them felt better, you know. So it's just, you know, again, there's just a lot of problems with research when you're talking about human beings who vary, interventions that vary, conditions that are variable, and you cannot, you know, make the comparisons that they're trying to make.
Right.
So, you know, people should really think twice before, you know, saying that, you know, this particular study supports, you know, this theory.
Yeah. Well, I always say you can't prove or disprove anything. You can only make a strong argument for something. And that's, you know, it's the same thing with the...
I think we said it was awesome.
Yeah.
I really like what you said.
Yeah.
Give it a try.
Yeah.
Because then once you give it a try and you let it apply to yourself, you realize the potency and the worth that it has and how it's like, this is the real deal, you know? So, you know, I think that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many variables. I mean, so many confounding variables.
I also think that... I think there's also, you know, that why do you do what you do? So you know, I've always pointed out that the types of clients that you train are mostly athletes. You don't train a lot of power lifters, you know, or Olympic lifters. And so again, I think your training needs to be appropriate to your goals, right? I think, and so in terms of functional movement for athletes like Parker, or you know, some of your other football guys, it wouldn't make sense necessarily to, you know, so if you're training to compete in a powerlifting meet, then you should train to compete in a powerlifting meet. If you're going to be an Olympic lifter, then there are things that you need to do in order to become an Olympic lifter.
Or if you're going to compete in CrossFit, like you better practice every single one of those events pretty darn well. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't also include some 90-degree training.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you.
No.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a healthy way to exercise. And so, you know, again, for your average person, unless it's ego lifting, you know, then the methods that you use, in my case, in 14 years, I've never had an injury that's kept me out of the gym.
That was going to be my next question I want to talk about. That it's been 14 years, and minus small, you know, 24-hour tweaks that anyone who does any type of intense physical activity, you're going to have that. If you're not training intensely, then, you know.
I've never had any surgery. I've never needed any surgery. And I've never not been able to train because, you know, I've hurt myself doing any of the stuff that and that's 14 years of that, you know. I've never had, you know, again, shoulder surgery. I've never had any kind of back issues. I've never, and yes, I mean, like the times when I've had sort of tweaks and things were things like in between, I remember in between the time that you graduated from UGA and you were trying to figure out where you were going to land. And so that was like a couple of months where I was training on my own. And then when I was training on my own, sometimes I'm not very good at pacing myself. And you know, so I would push myself a little too hard or whatever. And if I didn't like keep my form, you know, so then by the time we started training, maybe I had like some niggling things. But again, it's never kept me from, it's never been like, I can't go train because I've, you know, pulled my shoulder out or, you know, I have an ACL injury or whatever, you know. So.
Well, I'm not, again, this is not trying to toot my own horn here because it goes back to the methods. It has nothing to do with me as a trainer. It's nothing to do with you as a trainer. It has to do with the methods. In the last, I guess since I really started to incorporate the 90-degree philosophy, I guess you could say the last 12, 13 years, there have been 0 injuries in the weight room, which is pretty remarkable. Again, it speaks to the science and the training methods because we do a lot of heavy stuff. We do a lot of super maximal loading, meaning that you're handling more than your 1 repetition maximum.
Yeah.
It's not like we're training with low weights and just doing little fluffy exercises. I mean, we're doing, I want to get to some of your
5-plate plank.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've done quite a few impressive things, which I want to get to. But before we move on from the injury component, I want to just highlight something that I think is really important for the audience to understand, is that when you do have a little tweak, or you do have something that's nagging you, not just you, it's me, it's you, it's every single person that we work with, it's your body telling you something's a little bit off.
Not right.
Something has to be adjusted. And I can tell you, like 99% of the time, you've seen this with your own training, it's that we didn't adhere to the exact protocols that we've already known. For example, like we went just a little too far past 90, or we went just a little too deep on the squats, or posture wasn't set exactly how it needed to be. You know, you let your shoulders round just a little bit, or your feet rotated out a hair. So those tweaks are never a result of adhering to the methods. They're a result of veering away from the methods and compromising your form. So it has nothing. Basically, the more you properly lock in your technique, the less you're going to have even those 24-hour setbacks. And when you do have the setbacks, it's your body telling you, fix something, get the form more locked in. You've seen that.
Yeah, I have. And it's usually because I'm not doing something right, so it doesn't quite feel right. So now I'm trying to compensate for the fact that it doesn't feel right. And so it's just sort of this chain reaction. And then things start to bother me. Like, so I might have like, I did a lunge and my knee felt kind of funny. And, and usually we fix that by making sure that my heel is upright and things like that. And I'm not collapsing. I think for me, actually, over the years, the concept of tightness is a really hard concept to pass on to people. You see a lot of people doing exercises and they're just, the motion, but you're not staying tight, you're not co-contracting, you're not maintaining, proper form. And that's when things start to get inflamed.
So much value.
That's when you start to feel pain and so on and so forth.
Yeah, like you said, just the cue of stay tight.
Stay tight.
That's why when people listen to my videos of me coaching in the background, they'll often hear me say the same cues, like stay tight.
All the time.
Stay tight.
You look
it's
at
so
my
important.
Instagram page with my clients. Stay tight.
Exactly.
Tight.
Because once you have the foundations of the general cues of, posture, the feet, the core, and you're generally looking for your first natural stopping point of roughly 90 degrees. It's like, okay, well, what kind of cements that all together? Stay tight. Full body tension. Yeah. And that actually prevents you from being able to go past 90. It helps you lock in your posture. It helps screw your feet into the ground. It helps to engage your core. So it's like, okay, that cue almost summarizes all the other cues, but doing it in conjunction with, it's like, all right, this is how we really cement it into your nervous system. And it's funny too, because we've talked about this a little bit, but the methods, how they've changed over, especially like the last several years. Once we knew that 90 degrees was kind of like, okay, it's not around 90, it's not parallel. It's like, okay, it's pretty much right on 90 degrees for everyone, not just for you on a few lifts, but it's like, wow, this is more precise than I thought. But the simplification of the methods, I think that's the big thing that I've tuned into. We've discussed that a lot. We've discussed that of like the last even like year or two of how the training methodology has become more simplified, so it's less complex, and the results have been even better. And what I mean by simplification is the foundational principles of really emphasizing those, like the posture, set the head tall, and I think the head cue has been huge the last year or two. I think
nasal breathing,
the nasal breathing, the shoulders down and back, stomach in, feet straight, and it's so crazy how focusing on those general cues fixes, I would say, 95% or more of other issues. If you see something in one of your appendages, like, oh, you're having a little valgus collapse, or this elbow's doing this, rather than trying to fix and isolate that particular issue, it's like, all right, maybe something is off with their foundation. Go back to the posture, go back to the core, go back to the feet. Are those set now? And then oftentimes those issues self-correct, and you don't have to try to overcoach the other things. I think we've seen that a lot with you. Like when we have to correct something now, we go back to those things.
Right.
And whatever is off inevitably establishes itself in the body and it gets locked into how it needs to be. So
And
I think
how many of your athletes come in with injuries, and you work with them for a little bit. It's the
once upon a time.
Yeah.
right. I mean, hips and knees and stuff, and essentially, kind of making sure that they're performing exercises in the right form, staying tight, keeping their posture, and so on and so forth. Then they start, to feel much, much better. I mean, people who've come in who were told they needed to have surgery, and have not had to have surgery.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. To me, it works.
Yeah. Well, you're actually one of the rare clients that I train who doesn't have an injurious background.
Yeah.
My niche over the years has been to
People
get people
coming.
that people who are injured.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, he fixed me, or the methods fixed me. It's like, all right, I'm telling my friends, or I'm telling my other teammates. It's like that's and those are the type of people that I take on as clients. I'm not taking the general fitness people or somebody who wants to get in shape.
Yeah.
It's like, no, okay, you have a particular issue that the physical therapist couldn't resolve,
Yeah.
other methodologies and that they couldn't resolve it. All right, let's try this. And it almost, I wouldn't say almost always, it pretty much it does always work.
Yeah.
Again, it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the methods, and I keep pointing people back to that.
Yeah.
It's a great point.
Yeah,
Obviously, we know you're incredible what you do, but
you're
pushing the truth of the body and how it functions and how it helps other people.
Yeah, I think I'm a good trainer. I don't think I'm like this
Yeah.
incredible exemplary trainer. I think I'm a good trainer, but I think the methods are incredible, and a good trainer using incredible methods, you're going to get amazing results.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it comes down to more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I just feel like, I don't know if I think we're going to talk about this, but, for me, again, 14 years, starting at 50, when most people, talk about, I mean, you see this all over social media, oh, I'm over 40 and, I'm falling apart, or, people start to talk about the effects of aging and sarcopenia and all this kind of stuff. I'm over 30, I'm over 40 and whatever, and I'm starting to get injuries. And for me, I started at 50.
Right.
It's been 14 years. I've never had an injury. I'm stronger than I was at 20 and 30.
Well, you're stronger each year
Yeah.
than you were the previous year,
Yeah,
which
so
according
it's
to
not
science
even
shouldn't
like-
happen.
Yeah, and so it's not even like, oh, okay, I'm still in good shape, but I can't lift as much as I lifted 5 years ago. I mean, I don't think 5 years ago I could have done the carry that we did today.
Yeah, no, that carry she did a 315 yoke carry, an unstable yoke carry. In fact, I think by the time this episode comes out, that video will be up and people can see it on Instagram. But it was crazy. It's a 315 pound weight on your back that's hanging, swinging like a pendulum, and you were able to walk with that under control. That, I mean, that's like a lot of professional athletes would struggle to be able to do that.
So I don't feel like I've necessarily plateaued. I don't feel like I've regressed. I feel like, and I don't do anything special. I don't, I eat well, maybe I don't sleep as much as I should, but but by eating healthy and working out 5 to 6 times a week, following your methods, I've managed to build muscle, get stronger, and avoid injuries. And so I feel like, what's not to like?
Well, my favorite comment.
Why not try it?
My favorite comment is when some of the critics or haters, they'll say in the post like, "Oh, imagine if you trained with somebody who knew what they were doing." It's like, what else could? What else is there left for you to do?
Yeah, like when people say you'd have better results, I guess I don't know. First of all, you don't know me, so you have no idea what it is that I want out of this. I'm getting what I want out of this. If I wanted to, to be a power lifter, I'd probably need to start taking steroids. I'd probably, and then, I look at some of these people and I see the numbers of injuries that they've had, and people that are way younger than me, have had knee surgeries and hip surgeries and back surgeries and shoulder injuries and multiples of these. And I think, by the time you get to 50 and 60, I mean, I hope you're fine, but eventually, that has got to take a toll on your body. And so for me, it's like, I don't, I think CrossFit is kind of cool. But at the same time, I look at people and I think, wow, the numbers of injuries in those types of environments are just huge, and I don't want to put my body through that. So I don't know what it is that people think I want, or what results it is that they, my legs need to get bigger or something. I remember somebody actually posted on one of either your posts of me or one of my posts was, that my lower body wasn't, as big as it should be. I don't put a whole lot of muscle. It's harder for me to put muscle on my legs. My legs are strong, but size wise, I don't put on a lot of size.
But they still continue to grow
Yeah.
at a slow rate because, again, if you've been training for 14 years hard, I don't care if you're 20 and now 34, it's like your progress is going to slow down if you've been training that long.
But what I said to this person, and my only response to that comment was, I'm happy with the way I look. I don't want my legs to get, I don't want to have massive legs, it's not what I want. So, I don't know what it is that people expect me to say, or why it is that they think that there's something better out there.
I think they're just trying to pick anything, but just to give the audience some of the numbers that you've done. And I think a lot of people watching this are familiar with some of the things you've done because I post you quite often on my social media platforms, predominantly because it's incredibly impressive what you're able to do. I think you recently did, the second to most recent was a 370-pound trap bar carry. That's triple your body weight. You're able to walk with that for 5 yards, which that's insane, right?
That's amazing.
I mean, in fact, that was okay. I usually put up challenges, like I don't know, maybe one every 2 months. You've seen where I offer people $100 usually to some, something on my website. Here's for free, and I usually get at least several dozen people trying these, messaging me on Instagram, tagging me in the post, saying, "Hey, did I meet the criteria? Do I win?" Your post of the triple bodyweight farmer's walk, 0 people. I've never seen that before because it's one that I think most people are like, and you saw it in the comments, people are like, I'd blow my knee out. I'd blow my back out. My body wouldn't be able to handle it. And these are people in their 20s, 30s, and few in their 40s saying that. You're 64 and you're doing a triple bodyweight farmer's walk, no issues. And also, the criteria for this one was interesting, right? Because the criteria wasn't you just had to do a triple bodyweight farmer's walk. You couldn't use assistance tools. You couldn't use a belt. You couldn't use knee wraps. You couldn't use straps. You couldn't use elbow sleeves. Nothing. It had to be completely raw, barefoot or barefoot shoes. And that to me was the one that people were like, oh, forget that. I can't do that. Because even professional Olympic weightlifters, professional powerlifters, they're strong, but they still have to rely on these artificial tools to help them stay tight, like we talked about, because they have so many compensation patterns, because there's so many deviations in their biomechanics. It's like they have to rely on something to prevent them from collapsing or to keep them locked in. We don't do that. We never, if I gave you a belt, you'd be like, what do I do with this? You never used it. We use chalk, okay? That's the only thing we'll use is chalk. But it's, I was stunned. I still am, but I shouldn't be. That no one was able to complete that challenge, and it got like I think it got like 200 and something thousand views. No one, and I have a lot of advanced people who follow me. No one was able to complete that challenge, which still blows me away. But it just but it goes back to the methods and also your hard work and dedication, which is phenomenal to say the least. But you like tonight we did a 315-pound yoke carry. You've done half of your body weight for pull-ups in terms of we loaded her with 60-something pounds, and you were able to do a pull-up. That's impressive. Same thing on push-ups. You're able to get multiple reps with, I think we put like a 45 and then a 25 on top of your back, and had you do push-ups, you're able to do that. You're able to push press, single arm, half of your body weight. That's impressive too. I mean, there's so many. People can go online and see these, but there's no shortage of very just amazing feats of strength that you've been able to do because you've stayed healthy. And I want to take this back actually real quick. You mentioned this earlier, but this kind of segues into this topic of muscle atrophy. Okay? Because like you said, it's almost as if people think there's this mysterious catabolic pathway that turns on once you hit like 35 and you just start shrinking and atrophying before your eyes, and every day you look in the mirror, you're a little smaller until you're like shriveled up to Schmeagol from Lord of the Rings or something. But it's that so here's what I would say to that. First off, there's nothing in the literature about what attributes to muscle atrophy or sarcopenia, which is basically age-related atrophy, right?
Associated.
It's associated.
Yeah,
it's an observation.
is not causation.
Exactly. That's exactly. We always talk about that. Association. Association is not causation.
Equal causation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very important, but it's still and you pointed this out, that there are some pretty reputable studies and observational studies and research papers that say, like, okay, at 30, mid 30s or at 40, you're going to lose. They don't even say people tend to lose. It's like, no, you're going to lose muscle, you're going to lose strength once you start getting into that area of life. And it's just crazy to me, because we know firsthand, just from you and from other clients, but especially you, that's obviously not the case.
Yeah. I mean, sarcopenia is defined as a disease, right? It's muscle loss. And, a lot of people will say it's caused by aging. My view of that is that, there are conditions that are more common in older people, perhaps chronic diseases or things like that then cause muscle loss. Or you get older and for some reason, you're not as physically active. You sort of get into that sort of pattern where you're not doing any exercise. You're more sedentary. Maybe you've got some, a chronic disease or whatever. And so then, yes, you're going to start to lose muscle. But the mere fact that you're 40, 50, or 60, and you see on social media, you see lots of people that are my age or more, that are strong and have, that have plenty of muscle. So the fact that you're getting older in and of itself doesn't mean that you're going to lose muscle.
No. I'm going to slightly push back just a little bit on that, and I still agree with what you're saying, but essentially what you're suggesting or saying is that you still see people on social media and getting strength and looking good even in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and that it's not inevitable that once you hit a certain age that you're going to just start atrophying and have this sarcopenia develop. And I agree with that to an extent, but I think what I've seen is that I want to even take this back to some of my colleagues and contemporaries, like who I used to write with. Well, we didn't used to write together, but like on T Nation and Muscle and Fitness, I used to write a lot of, this. You used to see all my articles that I would write. That was back right before the social media era took over, and now nobody writes for magazines anymore.
MySpace.
Yeah, exactly. MySpace, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're even young for this, but everyone went to the muscle magazines.
T Nation.
T Nation was the big one, right? And there was about, I don't know, a few dozen of us that were real. I'm not going to mention any names because that's not my style. But there were a few dozen of us at the time, and kind of we got in at this last point of where everything was still popular in magazines, and then it shifted. But again, there was a few dozen of us. We all started following each other on social media. I still follow them. I think a few of them have unfollowed me now, probably because they don't agree with my methods. But what I'm getting at here is it's been interesting to watch their evolution as a writer and coach and trainee and trainer, because almost every single one of them, they're roughly my age, mid 30s now, early 40s, they're all lifting lighter. They're all talking about, trying to stay healthy at this new stage of their life. They're not able to push their bodies like they used to. They're literally writing on these topics. And it's like kind of a head scratcher. It's like, man, you're still in like the prime of your life. Like you're having to train less intense, not lift as heavy. Like your best days of strength training are behind you. And so, but I understand why, because if you're training with faulty mechanics, like, what I was doing in my early mid-20s, it caught up to you in your mid-20s. It caught up to me in my mid-20s. For these guys, for whatever reason, they've been able to go a little longer before it started catching up with them. So it's like when you're not training properly, inevitably you're going to have injuries. And those injuries, in my opinion, is what leads to this atrophy/sarcopenia, because your body just starts falling apart. But to me, that's one of the again, that's a complete observation, but I just found it very interesting. Like I'm the only person who, amongst these dozens of guys who used to write for these magazines, who is still, again, at a very slow rate, but I'm still getting stronger. I'm still lifting more than I was the previous year, and that's more than I was the year before that, just like you. The progress is crazy slow. We're talking maybe 5 to 10 pounds on one lift every year, but it's happening on all the lifts and all the exercises and all the body parts.
Yeah.
But when you've been training this long, it's like, okay, that's gonna happen. But there's not a regression of strength or a plateau, but certainly not a regression where you're going backwards because we're staying healthy, because we're training right. So I really think the training methods, again, to go back to that, that's what prevents this kind of like, oh, you're going to start losing muscle and strength when you're in your 30s and 40s. It's like, well, if you're training wrong, you probably will.
Yeah.
Compared to when you were able to get away with those methods in your 20s. And I think a lot of the inflammation that's produced from improper training and your body just feeling achy, it's not just preventing you from being able to train intensely, it's also just very problematic for your whole physiology. I mean, once the inflammation goes up, we're talking about your endocrine function is compromised, your immune system is compromised, nervous system. I mean, it all starts going downhill. So it's like, okay, then you start to see some muscle atrophy. So I don't think it's this particular pathway. And I would say, too, it's not that everyone can avoid it. I think you can avoid it if you train correctly.
I don't think we're saying anything different.
No, I agree.
I think what I'm saying is that there are different underlying reasons why you would lose muscle.
For sure.
And so, injuries and improper use and that kind of stuff could lead to loss of muscle.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, before we started training, back in your early days of high school, some of the injuries you went
times that I've been injured.
Oh, man.
I mean, I can notice obviously the muscle atrophy big time.
Yeah.
And then even like friends and stuff that are not playing football anymore, not being as active. I mean, there's atrophy in them too.
Yeah, and they're in their mid-20s. It's
right,
like, so it doesn't, it's kind of like, it's less about the age, more about the other variables of what you're doing with your body and lifestyle.
If you don't use it, you lose it. And if you use it improperly, you might also lose it.
Exactly. I love that. I'm stealing that.
I was about to say that. Like the frequency we always talk about, obviously you got to keep doing it. But then like in addition with that, just as importantly, how you're doing it correctly.
Exactly. Well, I mean, what's also, said the frequency.
Yeah.
We train 4 to 5 times a week, full body. Most of those are pretty intense. You also do 1 or 2 on your own. So it's like averaging 5 to 6 full body intense workouts per week. And you don't experience overtraining. You don't experience sore joints. Most people, they hear that. They're like, wait, 5 to 6 full body workouts a week? They're like, how are you not shot? Well, the methods again. I'm going to point people back to the methods. That's what it's about. When you do things right, you're training with optimal joint angles, 90 degrees, your posture's locked in, those force vectors, everything is optimized. And so this is why you've been able to keep doing it and, achieving those new numbers.
Yeah. But I should point out we don't go full bore 5 times a week.
No. It's usually 3 or 4
kind
of
of
those.
balance in terms
and that's important too for people to understand. It's like there's got to be a strategic way to do it. You can't just jump in and go max out. I mean, you could, but at that point you would start to feel, I wouldn't say injured, you would start to feel tired and fatigued if you're doing things right.
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing things wrong, you're going to get injured quickly.
Yeah, right.
But, I've tried training intensely, full body, every day in a row for like 30 or 40 days, done it a handful of times. Yeah. I've never walked away from that being injured, but I felt tired, and it was more of a self-experiment. Yeah, and I was like, okay, I'm not seeing the results I should as if I was giving myself a little bit more of a, recovery on certain days or backing off certain lifts. And again, we back off on the numbers and intensity, not so much because like your body needs the rest, but in order for us to really work on technique and form even more. Yeah. It's like the going lighter. What's that do? It allows you to really focus on technique and form while simultaneously still giving your body a little bit of a break. And but even, we do a lot of unique variations too. Again, 80% of the training that we do is still foundational. We still do basic barbell squats, trap bar deadlifts, bench press. But the other 20%, we'll throw in some unique and novel stimuli. And you've seen that with all the athletes. Same thing with you when you've trained. But it's not your ability to be able to perform those advanced, unique, novel stimuli well, and you've done a lot of them well. People have seen those, like some of the instability variations. You crush those, and you aren't able to do them because we have focused. We don't.
Them. We haven't been practicing them.
Exactly.
It's just because, you develop control of your body, and as long as you keep proper posture and
Exactly.
things are aligned, then it's much easier to maintain your balance
Exactly.
when you're standing on a piece of foam. So, or a Bosu ball or whatever. And but if your limbs are flailing all over the place, then it's much harder to maintain balance. So, so I mean, it's not like we spend a lot of time doing these things day in, day out for hours and hours on end, and that's why we're good at it. It's like, it's
that's just stability.
Yeah,
we just talk about with the mobility too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We master the basics. You focus on the basics, and then the other things open up to you because you've mastered
you're
the
just
basics.
able to do them.
And you always like the unique variations too because of the cognitive benefits.
Neural pathways.
Yeah. I mean, I find that it keeps it interesting. I think that, I think that is one of the reasons people stop lifting. If they go in and they do the same thing over and over and over and over again, eventually you probably hit a wall anyway. But also you don't have that sort of cognitive engagement. And if you're not mentally engaged in what you're doing, you're not likely to derive much benefit from it.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, those novel stimuli, it prevents you from being able to go on autopilot, which people would think autopilot might be good. It's really not, because like you said, the cognitive engagement is lower, and mastery of movement depends on the level of cognitive engagement. And you're also building those new neural pathways. We talk about that a lot. That's definitely one of the big benefits of periodically doing unique novel stimuli. Exactly. We're going to wrap this up pretty soon here, but I got a few more interesting questions for you. One that people often ask on your post, because of your physique, because of the impressive feats of strength and what you do and your age, people always want to know what your diet's like, your nutrition. Talk about that.
So I don't obsess over my diet. I don't, I'll be really honest, I don't count macros, and, I don't weigh things, and I don't, I'm terrible about prepping. I just don't have time. I have a full-time job that keeps me pretty busy. Again, more power to people that do that, but I don't. I mean, what I do is I make sure that I eat, I maintain a clean diet. I eat a lot of protein, and probably it's more important as I'm aging.
But you don't eat an excessive amount of protein either. I think people need to understand that.
Yeah. I mean, I eat a balanced meal.
Exactly.
I eat protein at every meal. I eat fruits and vegetables and things like that. It's really mostly just eating healthy.
Right.
It's not.
And you have a few starchy carbs, healthy starchy carbs.
Yeah, I eat oats pretty much every morning. My go-to breakfast on the weekends are protein pancakes, which So I don't know if we can mention products, but I love those Kodiak, pancake mixes and stuff.
Hit them up for a sponsorship.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have those. I really look forward to that on the weekends. I add eggs, I add milk, I add yogurt to those, and so then it's a really high protein meal. And I don't. And I just, that was one of the things in competition that I felt was burdensome. This business of, in order to maintain your level of energy, even just to train, having to eat like every 3 hours or whatever it is. And people will argue about this, but there really is no science behind the notion that you have to eat 5 or 6 times a day. You can eat 3 times a day, and as long as you consume the appropriate amount of nutrients, you're good. If you like to eat 5 times a day, then by all means do that. Just adjust your amounts. I tend to not do that, so I have a good breakfast. I'll have salads and with chicken, and I even sometimes put in. I usually have some form of starch also. So I don't starve myself of carbs, and I don't starve myself of fats. It's just, I try to follow, basic guidelines and just eat healthy.
Like you said, you don't over obsess about it. And at the same time, you still keep a relatively low body fat continuously and consistently. and you stay healthy, you stay strong. So this idea that you have to just be so either perfect with your diet or just abandon it and, you know, throw all caution
people,
to the wind.
you know, and there's just, I mean, so many like fads and trends and things that come and go. And at the end of the day, you know, because it's like, oh, you got to go on keto. And most of, you know, you go on these weird diets and these, you know, totally extreme things, and they're hard to sustain. And I feel like at the end of the day, our bodies are not meant to go, you know, without protein and just only fats and, you know,
or certain nutrients, like elimination diets.
Yeah, and just, you know, and be in a state of ketosis. Again, I know there are people out there that would argue with that, but I think that's just really hard to sustain. And again, I'm not sure that there is good evidence that these things are good for you, you know. So I think just eating a normal diet and making sure that you consume, you know, proper amounts of protein, adjusting for your level of activity is essentially.
Kind of like the range of motion.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many trends on social media. I mean, this is one of the problems with social media, is that the balanced approach, especially with diet, isn't sexy. It's not glamorous, and it's not interesting. So people have to come up with something different. And these trends tend to come and go. We've seen it. I think one that people often forget about, but you remember this one. Remember the pain science trend? And if people, again, aren't familiar with that, do you remember that? Did we talk about the pain science trend? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
It's it honestly came and went. I would say lasted a few years, and that was it. Basically, it was this notion that pain is all in your mind, and that you've just been conditioned to thinking that something is going to cause pain because of prior circumstances, or
you mentioned this briefly.
Yes, and you know, you got to reprogram your mind, and you know, once you do that, you'll be able to kind of move however you want and train however you want, and you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, your technique that much. And it took off. It caught fire for a few years because it was everyone's answer temporarily to why traditional methods that were supposedly right. It was the answer to why people were still in pain and still getting injured. So everyone, you know, jumped on this bandwagon pretty quickly. And I got so much hate for saying this is bogus. This is not substantiated by science. I even wrote articles about it, showing that the pain science studies themselves were pretty, you know, they lacked a lot of evidence. You found that when you looked at the studies, but after a few years that people realized, like, okay, this trying to brainwash people into thinking like, oh, your body's fine. It's like, no, if you're injured and you're in pain and there's inflammation, it's for a reason. It's not you just didn't concoct it out of thin air. Your body is hurting because something's not firing right. Your biomechanics are off. Fix your biomechanics, your movement patterns, your muscle function. Then the pain will go. Then you won't have to try and do some weird hypnosis thing to get people out of pain, which didn't even work. So we've seen so many trends come and go. I think the nutrition thing is pretty similar. One other trend before we wrap up that I want you to briefly talk about, because you're kind of known as the barefoot queen, right? You're always going barefoot. But that was a trend that also came and went like 15 years ago in the Vivo barefoot, or it was Vibram 5-finger shoes. Remember the 5-finger shoes? You remember those?
Yeah.
People really got into that for a few years, and that was one of the few fitness trends, in my opinion, that was like, okay, now we're heading in the right direction. And that one also, people kind of went away from that because everyone was getting injured, and now it's kind of coming back a little bit more now.
It's actually, I think it's coming back big time. I think that people are beginning to see that, you know, wearing shoes that allow your feet to spread out, you know, and all of that helps with proprioception, you know, feeling the ground and so on. You know, I mean, there's still obviously a whole lot of people that love their Hokas, and that's, you know, all fine and well, but at the end of the day, I mean, when we first started training, I was wearing sort of regular, you know, sneakers, kind of, you know, running shoes or that kind of stuff. And then you were starting to wear...
I had just started to wear barefoot shoes.
The New Balance barefoot ones.
Were you wearing sneakers before?
Like literally probably up until the few months before she started training.
Like when I started, and so then I switched over to, you know, to wearing minimalist shoes. And I actually, back in the day, I did used to run. When I played tennis in college, we had to run. It was just part of our training. And I've always had shin splints. I always ended up with shin splints after running. And then I switched over to barefoot shoes, and I would run, up on the track at Ramsey, and and I had never had shin splints again. Now I said I don't run because I don't like it. Yeah. It's not my favorite activity, but I and then I'm not even really sure why. I don't like to wear shoes. It's just sort of part of it. It's like I like to go barefoot.
Constricts the toes.
Yeah. And so we started training like completely barefoot, like not even, with any shoes. And, and I like it. I feel like, it's easy. You feel the ground, you feel where your body is, your proprioception is a lot better. You can really screw your feet into the ground when you're exercising, which you can't do when you've got like this big cushion, between you and the ground.
Right.
So,
everyone we train, they either go barefoot or they wear something like a really good barefoot shoe, like Vivo Barefoot, which is as close as you can get to true barefoot. Some people just don't feel comfortable with that, but like you said, all the benefits. There's so many benefits, and I think people are realizing the benefits. But I think it's interesting too that there's really, it's not a coincidence that at the same time I started switching to the barefoot training, I also started to really come to the 90-degree thing, because they go hand in hand. Like if you really start to pay attention to your foot mechanics, you're not going to be able to get into these ultra loose, collapse, exaggerated positions, because you're going to have to sacrifice those optimal foot mechanics. Your feet are going to become like mush at the bottom. So I think that was, it's interesting that was a similar timing that happened. Just kind of looking back at when I introduced it to you, it was literally at the same time.
And I actually, along those lines, but also related to the earlier conversation about research, when I was looking up, when knowing that I was going to come here, we were going to talk a little bit about research. And so I was looking through some systematic reviews of, musculoskeletal type studies. And there is a study about different kinds of shoes. And the fact that there's no evidence to suggest that if you use, shoes with a lot of cushion, that you have fewer, lower limb injuries.
Right.
So, so again, I mean, we go by advertising, and, people fall prey to a lot of that kind of stuff, but,
I know. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, but at the same time, when you actually look at like the biomechanics of what happens with movement when you are in a barefoot condition or barefoot shoe compared to shod running or shod conditions, which means normal shoes, it is pretty substantial. But this is, I feel like we could just keep going on and on. We're going to have a part 2. I knew this was going to happen because
awesome.
There's so much we wanted to, I feel like we scratched the surface for some of the, especially like the research stuff, because I know it's a big passion of yours, and I'm sure the audience wants to hear more about your training and incredible feats of strength. But anything else you'd have to say, or that you want to say to the audience, especially when it comes to like maybe the methods, the 90-degree stuff, or any other advice that you want them to know?
I mean, I think that, before you knock it, you should try it. I think that, it's, I mean, yes, it's the only training I've ever done because I've only ever trained with you. But I know that when there have been periods of time where either you've, for some reason or another, we haven't been able to train, and things start to, drift from the mechanics that we use in training, that's when I'm going to start to feel, things here and there, and, not necessarily injuries, but, I'll feel a twinge here and there. So again, I feel like for me, the 90 degrees works. I feel like before people knock it and say, why are you doing it, or laugh at what the kinds of things that you're proposing, then, try it. Try it. If it doesn't, alternatively, don't follow it.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly.
Like, why are you following something that you don't believe in and you don't like? Exactly. So stop following it if it really sends you off into a rage. but otherwise, you know, be open-minded.
Yeah.
I feel like people get really tunnel visioned into,
Great.
you know, certain things. I suppose some people might say that you have tunnel vision when it comes to 90 degrees.
Well, I think what the difference is that I've tried the others.
Yeah.
I've tried.
Right.
I came from that background.
Yeah.
So
right.
like you said, it's like,
yeah.
hey, try it before you bash it. I am bashing it because it literally ruined my body almost to the point where I needed surgery.
Right.
Fortunately, you know, I always say God led me on this path, and I'm super thankful to Him for that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I would have been I was in tremendous pain, and it would have been long term, I think. So,
I think people need to be open-minded. I mean, try it. If it doesn't work for you and you want to go back to doing what you were doing, then go back to doing what you were doing. But give it a try, and you know, and if it, you might find actually, you might be pleasantly surprised that it actually works.
Yeah.
So
I have a lot of people ask me, hey, should I try knees over toes or should I try yours? Like, I always say try them both, try them separately, and see. I never try
whatever works.
I'm not going to try and convince them one over the other. I'm going to let them decide based on their experience, and that to me is the most powerful thing. So, like what you said, it just reiterates that. But yeah, this was awesome. Part 2 for sure. And yeah, that was great. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank
it was,
you.
terrific.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I learned some extra stuff about you as well. So that's
I learned a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope you guys learned a lot too. You can follow Leslie on social media, especially on Instagram. She has her Instagram page. It's
Petch Lee.
Petch Lee 1. Yeah. That's her handle. So she's got all kinds of great videos and content on her page. I post her a lot. So if you want more information about her, just check it out on social media. But that's a wrap for this one.
All right. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out this other one. I think you'll find it just as informative.